So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for coming out here today. I know it is a tough journey to be out here at noon on a Friday of Ignite. So thank you very much, and congratulations for making it here. Your reward is you get to hear us talk for 75 minutes. So hopefully it won't be too bad. We'll try to keep you guys entertained. So I want to go ahead and get started. My name is Jenny Hunter, and I'm a program manager on the Azure Automation team with a focus on change tracking and inventory.
And my name is John Messick. I'm also a program manager on Azure Automation, and I work on Azure Update Management.
And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to use some of our different services and capabilities for managing Windows, Linux, and your hybrid environment. So to kind of go into your understanding of this, we're going to be looking a lot at the Azure Automation focused capabilities. So just to get started with a little show of hands, how many of you have used an Azure Automation capability already today? Oh, surprising amount. So you got about 1/3 to 2/3 of you guys. Awesome. So we'll try to pivot our talk a little bit towards that. So just to go ahead and get started, IT is transforming. You have this difference that's coming as a result of new cloud technologies getting introduced, and it's changing how you're viewing operations. And as a result, you really see two main models coming out of it: a very central IT control model and a delegated IT control model that a lot of times get associated with the on-prem type environment and the cloud type environment. But each of them have their different strong suits and their capabilities. And you see things and differences like provisioning time and who is really in control. In the central IT, you have the core IT admins who are just strictly enforcing rules, doing all the updates and the configurations themselves, where in the more delegated model, you have more of guidance and being able to actually empower your app owners and developers. So we're going to break down kind of how we're tackling hybrid management here in Azure and at Microsoft. It's really built down into three capabilities. One, we want to make sure that it feels built in. It should be a full end-to-end management experience, and it should not be an afterthought. It should just be there where you need it. We also want to make sure that it's available across your environment, so Windows, Linux. And we fully support Azure. We love Azure here, obviously. But we also want to make sure that we can support your on-prem and any cloud environment. So looking into that, we offer a really wide breadth of different services here in Azure to kind of make sure that you can secure and well manage your entire environment. So to do that, the first one we're looking at is governance. And that's about how do you kind of bring everything under control. And you've probably seen presentations that have similar slides to these, so I'm going to kind of blow through this. But there you're looking mostly at Azure policy and our recent acquisition with Cloudin, which allows you to kind of optimize cost management for the cloud. Then you have security, which is all about advanced threat protection and Azure Security Center and how to make sure that your environment is secure. And monitoring, so you have things like Azure Monitor with all your native integration with Azure Alerts. And then you also have things like application insights to really tell you the performance and metrics of your environment. The resiliency is all about how do you back up, how do you, through Azure Site Recovery, make sure that your environment is resilient. And automation, which is the area we're going to be focusing on most today, which is how do you orchestrate across your environment, kind of remove some of those redundant error-prone tasks, and really make sure that your configuration is the way it's supposed to be. To do that, we have three core capabilities within automation. We have update management, which is all about how do you know what patches or updates are missing in your environment, and how do you take that next step to actually deploy or schedule an update to them. Then you have configuration management, so you want to apply a certain configuration once a machine is set up, and then actually making sure that you can track that in-guest configuration to make sure there's no drift. And lastly, process automation, which is all about how do you actually run those PowerShell scripts, Python scripts, and actually set up those tasks across your environment. So there was a talk earlier today about process automation that was really great. So as a result, we're not going to cover it as strongly in that, but I encourage you to go and watch that video. So today we're going to be focusing on update management and configuration management. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to John to start with update management.
Thanks, Ginny. So everybody understands that update management is difficult to begin with, but in today's evolving environment, there are a lot of new challenges that we're facing. Many of us are managing environments that have many different operating systems that have different kinds of patch requirements. And we're managing those systems not just on-prem, but in Azure, as well as maybe other clouds as well. And also, how do you manage your update environment reliably and at scale? And how do you apply those patches both in cloud as well as on-prem? And finally, how do you enable centralized compliance while still allowing distributed management and empowering your application owners to take control of some of that patch management themselves? And this is particularly important when we talk about update and patch management because it's very invasive to the service that you're managing. So, a lot of patches involve rebooting the server, affecting the software that's on the systems, and the people that understand the applications best are the people who own those applications, not central IT. So there's kind of a struggle between how do you maintain central governance and compliance while still empowering those individual application owners. So before we talk about Azure Update Management, I want to spend a second talking about the different update solutions that Microsoft offers. We get a lot of questions about, why are there multiple solutions and when should I use one over the other? And in particular, there's three that we get asked about a lot. And the first one is System Center Configuration Manager. Now, SCCM is really optimized for working on premises against Windows client and server systems. And the second one we get asked a lot about is Microsoft Intune. And this is really about managing your end user Windows systems as well as devices. And then finally, there's Azure Update Management. With Azure Update Management, we're optimizing for cloud and hybrid scenarios and across diverse Linux as well as Windows servers that need to be patched. Now, when we talk about update management, it helps to think about it as a continuous process that involves three primary phases. First of all is assessment, and this is really about understanding what the current state of your environment is and what patches are available to be deployed into that environment. And then the second phase is obviously deploying those updates. And how do you do that reliably, and how do you do it at scale? And how do you do it from a single interface and normalize all that information across all those disparate systems? And then finally, how do you ensure compliance? How do you know that your systems are updated and do that from a central IT perspective so that across your entire environment, you're maintaining compliance and maintaining your governance needs? These are some of the big problems that we try to address with Azure Update Management. And also, obviously, one of the best parts of it is we offer it for free across all your environments. So Jenny asked how many of you are using Azure Automation. Can I get some hands on how many are using Update Management? Okay, a good portion of the people who are using automation are using Update Management. That's great. So I want to spend a minute talking about some of the new features we've introduced in the last 6 months or so. Team's been really busy. We got a lot of new features coming out, and we also have a lot more in the pipeline. So one of the big asks we've had from the community is to give more options for onboarding your servers into Update Management. So we've introduced some capabilities to integrate with VM Browse so that you can do bulk onboarding of your systems directly from within the Azure portal with the VM Browse blade. And we've also integrated with Windows Admin Center so you can also onboard directly from within the OS itself within your servers. Some of the other integrated experiences that we've introduced include integration with Azure Security Center. Another big ask is for the ability to dynamically target VMs in our update deployments. We just this past week released a new feature which allows you to target Azure VMs dynamically utilizing native Azure concepts like resource groups and tags. Another ask that a lot of people have had is, how can I set up an environment where I only deploy explicitly whitelisted patches and updates across my environment? So for instance, a lot of people deploy to a canary environment, validate that these patches don't do anything to break their systems before they get deployed out into production. So we introduced the concept of inclusion lists, where you can have very fine control about which updates are getting rolled out into your environment. We've also introduced some hooks to allow you to add custom logic into our update deployments in the form of global pre- and post actions. And what this does is allows you to attach a script to our update deployments so you can do things like do an ordered shutdown of services before a patch run and then bring those services back up in a manner that makes sense to your application after the patching has happened. And then we've also added fine-grained reboot controls and a bunch of other features. And a lot of this, most of the feature work that we prioritize is based on feedback from the community. So if you haven't visited our feedback forum, please do that. Give us feedback on what you want to see. Upvote the features that other people have posted that you want to see us work on as well. So the first part of that cycle I talked about is assessment. And that's understanding what is the current state of my environment. So we give you views into that allow you to see at a glance across all your servers what the update status currently is. So in this instance, we can see that I've currently got 6 systems under management for update management, and out of those, 5 of them are missing security and critical updates. I can also drill in and look at the individual servers and see which of those are non-compliant. And again, this is both in Azure as well as reaching down into my on-prem environment as well. And finally, I can pivot and see which updates are available and look at it from an update perspective and see how many machines are affecting that. For instance, in this case, we can see that we have a critical update that's been published that affects one of my machines, and then we have some security updates published by Microsoft that are affecting another 4 of my machines. And then for each of those updates, you can drill in and get details such as whether or not this update is going to require a reboot and the classification of this update and when it was published. So I'm going to switch over a demo and kind of guide you through how you get started with Azure Update Management. So the first thing I'm going to do is just navigate to one of my VMs. And within the VM, you can see that under Operations, there's an option for Update Management. So we're going to navigate there. And we can see here that it says that we're not currently onboarded, so this VM isn't enrolled in Update Management. And we can enroll it directly from the VM and attach it to our Update Management solution. And our solution requires a couple of extra components to work. It requires an automation account, and this allows you to run scripts reliably in your environment. And then it also requires a log analytics workspace. And this allows us to aggregate logs across your environment and provide you views about what's going on within that environment. And you can attach your VM to an existing automation account and workspace, or you can just create some default ones from right within the blade here. Now I'm going to navigate back and go to one of my machines that already has the solution enabled. Navigate to the same blade. Oop, I think I grabbed the wrong one here. And at a glance, we can see that my machine here is currently compliant. It's missing, and compliant means that it has all its security and critical updates applied to it. However, there are some additional lower classification updates available for it. So here we can see that it looks like there's a cumulative update and some virus definitions, and looks like an update rollup for a removal tool. And that's looking at it from a single VM perspective. However, when you're managing at scale, you're going to do most of that work within your automation account. So here I've navigated to the Contoso Marketing Automation account. And similarly, I'm going to scroll down to Update Management and navigate to that blade. And here we see a similar view as we saw on the single VM, except this is across our entire environment. So here we can see that I have 17 machines under Update Management. And quite a few of them, it looks like, are non-compliant, which means that they're missing some updates. So I can roll over and look at the individual updates that are missing, and we can see that it looks like there's been a security update published for curl, and that's affecting 9 of my machines. So now that we understand the state of our environment, the next step is to set up updates. And we give you a lot of options for doing that. And at the core, we create this thing called an update deployment. And this consists of a couple of pieces. One is, what is the set of target machines that I want this set of updates to apply to? And it also includes which updates do I want to deploy within this update deployment, as well as a schedule. And this schedule can be single or recurring. So a single update deployment means that I only want to deploy this once. And that may be, for instance, if there's been a day 0 exploit with an update available and you immediately want to patch your environment. But then once you get everything set up to where you want to automate your environment, you're going to create recurring schedules that will deploy on a periodic basis into your environment to keep everything automatically up to date. And we have flexible targeting options. So you can import groups from your on-prem environment. So we can target WSUS groups, SCCM groups, as well as Active Directory groups. So we have connectors to import all that information. You can also target by individual machine, or you can create your own custom queries within Log Analytics. And once you start setting up these update deployments, we allow you within the portal to track both existing and past deployments so you can understand what was patched with each deployment, whether it succeeded or failing, and basically have an audit log of what's going on within your environment. And then finally, we give you views to help you validate that you're meeting your compliance needs. And we have some pre-canned ones within Log Analytics, but you can also create your own and attach your tools like Power BI to do your business reporting as well. And of course, we integrate with Azure Security Center, so if you're looking at your environment from a security perspective, you can see the patch state of your environment along with all your other security information. And we also have some simplified dashboard views that you can drop onto your dashboard. And this is really great for like individual application owners. So every time they log into the Azure portal, at a glance, they can tell whether or not they're currently in a good state with their patches. And we tie in with Azure Monitor so you can tie eventing and monitoring in with your existing workflows. So now I'm going to navigate back into my automation account to the Update Management solution, and I'm going to schedule an update deployment. So the first thing I want to do is give it a name because we want to be able to go back later and understand what this is and have some meaningful context for it. So I'm going to make a weekly patch schedule, and let's do a weekly Saturday. And this is going to target Windows machines. So the first thing I want to do is set up the schedule. So we can go into schedule settings, and I'm going to make this a recurring schedule that recurs every week on Saturdays. And as you can see, we have various scheduling options, expiration dates, and so forth. The next thing I want to do is target the set of machines. As I mentioned earlier, We can do this by individual machines, or we can import saved searches, or we can import your groups from on-prem or use saved searches that you create or that are auto-created. But one of the new features that we released just this week is the ability to dynamically target Azure VMs. And so what I'm going to do in this particular scenario is select a set of VMs that are in my Contoso IT subscription, and you can select multiple subscriptions. And I want to do this across all my resource groups. But the real power comes with tagging. So in this scenario, what I want to do is only pick up machines that have a tag patch window equals Saturday morning. And now what happens is this query runs every time the update deployment gets executed. So as new machines come into your environment, if you tag them with patch window equals Saturday morning, it's going to pick those up and add them to this deployment. And so you could see possibly driving this through policy or other automated mechanism, maybe templates, for instance. And if I ran that now, we have preview buttons, so if I ran this update deployment right now, we can see that it would pick up 9 machines. But again, that gets evaluated every single time an update deployment happens. As I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to do explicit inclusion lists. So if I have an environment where I only want to let patches be deployed, which I've already tested and whitelisted, I could come in here and explicitly list those out. And in that scenario, what I would do is just say, don't deploy anything by classification, only deploy the patches that I explicitly have whitelisted. But more normally, on a recurring basis, what you would do is set one or more classifications for this deployment. Since I'm doing this weekly, I probably only want to do security and critical updates. I may want to go into my environment and create a separate monthly schedule that would do lower priority updates, such as for driver updates. The next feature I want to show you is pre and post scripts. So this is a really cool new feature that also just came out in the past week. It's in public preview. And as I mentioned, you can attach these to your deployment so that it runs before and or after. And you can create your own, but we've published several in the gallery. A really interesting one is turn on and off VMs. And a lot of people have environments where, in order to save on OpEx costs, they power down their VMs unless they're actually using them. But you still want to maintain a patch state for those systems. So with pre and post scripts, you can attach these scripts, and when your deployment runs, if there's a certain set of machines within that deployment that are currently powered off, the pre-script will bring them up, your patch run will update them, and then a postscript will take those and put them back into an off state. And I want to jump over real quick into script. So this is the script that you can download from the gallery and just use directly or modify yourself. There's a couple of interesting pieces here. The first one is that there's this implicit parameter in the script called a software update configuration run context. And this gives your script the context it needs to understand what's going on with the update deployment. In particular, one of the most interesting things is getting the list of machines that are being patched. And as you can see in the line right here, we just pull out the Azure VM IDs. And the reason we do that is because later on in the script, we're basically going to iterate through each of those VMs and check whether or not it's in a startable state, which means it's not currently running, but we could turn it on. And if that's the case, then we do two things. One is we actually start the VM, and two, we save it into a list of VMs that we've explicitly started within this script. And then finally, at the end of the script, we save that off in an automation variable. And in our post script, we're going to pull that automation variable back out so that we get the list of machines that we turned on in the script and power them back down. So the net effect is all your machines are updated, even if they were in an off state before the update cycle, and after the update cycle, they're still in the previous turned off state. And the last piece I want to show you is we can navigate in and look at the upcoming deployments. So here we can see that we've got 3 deployments that are running periodically within my, actually we have 2 that are running periodically in my environment and 1 that was just a one-time deployment. So the 2 periodic ones we can drill in and look at, but don't need to do that right now. We can see that we have an update deployment coming up on August 30th and then or September 30th and another one on October 3rd. And we can also look at past deployments and see their success rate, and we can drill into that and look at which machines were patched and which patches were deployed. So we can see here that this was an update deployment that was just targeting a single machine, and it looks like nothing was actually deployed because we were only targeting critical and security updates here. There were some other patches available during this run, but they weren't selected to be installed, so they got skipped. So we have a lot of customers that are successfully deploying this at scale and using a lot of the new features. One of the really interesting one is our own Microsoft IT. So what they've done is they've traditionally had a model where Microsoft IT has had central control of all the updating of their data center servers. And they've just moved to a model where they've empowered the application owners themselves to do the updating. And Microsoft IT has moved into more of a support role where they are providing guidance and guardrails to the application owners, but still enabling those owners to do the work themselves. And then Microsoft IT has moved to more of a governance and compliance role. As I mentioned, we support multiple operating systems from 2008 R2 on up for Windows Server, as well as multiple SKUs of Linux and multiple versions of those as well. So we have a lot of questions about what it looks like in deployment, and so I wanted to spend just a second talking about that. So there's 3 main pieces. There's the system that you want to update. There's log analytics, which ingests all those log files and gives you the state of those systems. And then there's Azure Automation, which allows us to perform actions in our environment. And what I'm showing you here is a VM that's running in Azure, but the process is very similar for on-prem. And it's also similar across Windows and Linux. There's slight agent differences and slight differences in the way the agents get deployed, but the basic process is the same. So the first thing that happens is the Microsoft monitoring agent is deployed to the VM. And in the case of Azure, this happens through the Azure Guest Agent. And then on top of that, we deploy our update management pack. And this allows us to gather logs and information that's specific to the update lifecycle. And then finally, we deploy a hybrid worker, and this allows us to apply patches to that system. And that's attached to an automation account as well in Azure. And then once all this is set up, periodic assessment occurs, and that information is pushed up into log analytics. When you go to deploy an update job gets created, and that's pushed down into the hybrid worker on your server, and the server gets patched. And this all happens through communication on port 443, so you need to be aware of that if you have a lockdown environment. And there's more information about that on the short links on the slide as well. I also wanted to talk briefly about what we do with that information that we gather. So the information that you get directly from the box is in raw form, and it's different across different operating systems. So it's very hard to get normalized information about what's going on in your environment. But as a start, we gather the information about which patches need to be applied to your servers. And we get that directly from the update agent on the box, whether that's Windows Update Agent for Windows, or Yum, or apt-get, or whatever is appropriate for your various flavors of Linux. And the reason we do that is now we know for that server exactly what needs to be applied to that server. And so if you're pulling your updates, for instance, from WSUS on-prem, and have a different set than you would normally get from the Windows Update process, we're going to pick that up. And as well for Linux, if you're using private repositories, we'll pick those updates up as well. And that gets pulled up into the cloud. Oops. That gets pulled up into the cloud, and we do a couple of things to it. We enrich it with information from vendors so that we get a lot rich. So some SKUs of Linux, for instance, don't have any patch information by default on the box, whether it's critical or not. So we get that enhanced information from publishers. And then we normalize it across all your different SKUs so that you can get a single view of what your environment looks like. So today we've talked about the key scenarios for update management, going through the life cycle of assessing, updating, and ensuring compliance, and how Azure Update Management can help you out with that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to talk about configuration management.
Great, thank you so much, John. So you guys heard about one component of the automation kind of overall section from John, which is how do you bring your kind of environment and updates in and make sure that you're updated the way you need to be. So now I'm going to kind of shift focus here and talk about how do you set the configuration in your environment and make sure it stays set that way. So to do that, we're looking at overall configuration management is split into 3 core components for us. We have inventory, so how do you know what you have? Change tracking, how do you make sure it hasn't changed and that there isn't any drift in your environment? And configuration management, so how do you actually set that configuration as code and assign those roles properly? So to delve a little further, we have inventory, so discover what's installed on your machines. And so to do that, we kind of look at 4 or 5 main types, which is software, so that's across both Windows and Linux, so your applications and packages. Then services and Linux daemons, files for both Windows and Linux, and Windows registry. So we look at these different types and tell you what state they're in on your machines across your environment. Then this has a lot of really cool scenarios. For instance, if you're just trying to figure out how many machines have a specific software or a specific version. So in the case of the screenshot here, you could see I actually have Chrome installed on a machine, which can be really problematic if I'm looking at a bunch of servers. And so this inventory is actually updated whenever we detect a change, and also a full refresh every 24 hours to make sure that it's always up to date. Then we have change tracking. So like I said earlier, this is all about what has changed in your environment and how do you make sure that you're aware of those changes. So to do that, we're looking at the exact same types as inventory and really just giving you that easy timeline view of understanding at a glance. So how do you view changes when you're troubleshooting? How do you find the root cause of a problem? And how do you alert on critical changes? If W3 service is down on your IIS server, you're going to have a problem. How do you make sure that you find out about that quickly and effectively? And so all of this change tracking is really just about the difference in your inventory snapshot. So these 2 tools are really integrated together. And you'll see that in how we try to position them. So inventory kind of tells you what you have, and then it integrates with change tracking. So as soon as change tracking detects a change in one of those, it updates inventory. So they're working hand in hand there. And we've had a lot of good customer feedback from this, because it's really giving you that insight into your environment that you don't get with a lot of other tools, and really helping make your solutions more proactive. So I'm going to go ahead and switch into a demo. So you could see here, I'm actually starting off in the automation account. So you could get there by just drilling down into automation accounts from your services, but most of you know that already. So down in the TOC, I can go and click on inventory. And so what this will do is load up just a quick view of what state my machines are in. So here I could see I have a bunch of different Ubuntu machines, I have some Windows machines, I could see what platform they are, all at a simple glance. I can also drill down further into the software, files, registry, and all the things I mentioned. So for software, I could go ahead and do that same case from earlier where I searched Chrome. And I could see that Chrome is installed on one machine in my environment. And then I could easily just drill down into that and see which machine has it, and drill down further to get the specific details of the Chrome version in the computer. Then if I'm looking for a specific configuration across my environment, I could drill down into files or registry. But what's really cool is on the services and daemons tab, we actually tell you how many machines have that service or daemon running or stopped. so you can see what state that machine is in. So for instance, that example I used earlier with W3 service for my IIS servers, I could see that one is stopped here, which is again going to be a serious issue that I should look further into. If I go into change tracking, I'm going to be able to see these same types. So I could see all the types kind of laid out there in a simple timeline view. And I could see all the changes that occurred down here. I could also drill down into the settings. So the settings are really important for change tracking and inventory because they could let you configure kind of what you're tracking. So by default, we track software, services, and daemons and just collect all of them. But if you want to drill down into further registry and files so that we don't overload your bandwidth or anything, we let you configure exactly which ones you want to look at. So here I have a few that I know I need to watch for my IIS servers. And then there's also a whole bunch that are kind of recommended by default that you'll have in your account whenever you make it. And those kind of point out different vulnerable points in your environment that could potentially be dangerous. For instance, the startup and shutdown scripts. And then we have different things across Windows files and Linux of how you can configure it there. Okay. I'm going to go back into the slides. So quick overview of how this works, just really high level. So from the change tracking inventory service, you're going to be able to kind of onboard and get enabled. And this is all communicating through the monitoring agent. So you might know this as the Microsoft monitoring agent, or on Linux, the OMS agent. And then through that, we're actually using PowerShell desired state configuration. So if you have any familiarity with PowerShell desired state configuration, it's using that same kind of configuration as code, and we're looking at it as a monitor-only mode. So we don't apply anything to your environment, we just kind of see what state it's in. And we're using those different resources and doing a general collection of the items you've told us to get. So it's called get inventory. And then once those items are collected, we funnel them into log analytics to make sure that you have a clear log and history of everything, their state, and what's changed. And then again, that's funneled back into your views through Azure. So what's new in 2018? So we have a few really cool areas that have come out in 2018. One of my favorite is expanded file support. This was a really big ask from you guys, so I was so excited that we got to deliver this. So we've always, for the past few years, we've been able to help you track Windows and Linux files, but our Windows file support just grew even bigger. We allow you to recursively track with environment variables, so you can recurse through different folders, you can recurse across different scalable environments, because your different settings can now have the environment variables, so you have the different drives. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at a C drive or a D drive, you could put the environment variable in there. And this allows you just a lot more control and more breadth and flexibility. We also brought in the file content. So you can choose to opt in for different settings to bring in your file content. And this is super powerful for your configuration files, because you can see exactly what changed in that file straight from the Azure portal. Then we have faster service collection, which is another key scenario that we heard from you guys. So our default is 30 minutes, but you can actually bring that down and reduce the loss and adjust it anywhere between 30 minutes and 10 seconds collection frequency. And then we have integration across Azure. So you'll see us now, we're called File Integrity Monitoring in the Azure Security Center. And so this really kind of helps bring in the knowledge from Azure Security Center of what you should track to be secure in your environment. And then we also have UX integration with log analytics machine groups so that you can more easily create a machine group based off the configuration of your machines. So I'm going to show that. So here, I'm back in this same window. I could go drill down into my different types. Here, I'm going to select Files. And I could see that I have a few different file changes that have occurred. So within the file change, all I have to do is click and drill down more into it. And I could see the before and after, but the new thing here is this View File Content Changes button. And from here, I could see that there was a change to my host file that actually resulted in the IP address being changed to my backup server, which could explain some of the issues that I'm having. We also wanted to make sure, after feedback from some of you guys, that people have a tendency to be very particular of how they view file content, as it turned out. We had a 50-50 kind of approach of whether people wanted to do side-by-side or inline. So for those of you that are very particular about it, we provided both. So you can view it in your favorite way. And then if I drill down into services, you can see just how fast some of these services are collecting. So the one reason we didn't just bring this down entirely and we made it adjustable is, as a result, some of these services can be a little noisy and you could get a lot of data coming in. So this is really great if you're trying to bring down that loss and really trying to keep track of some of these services. But if services aren't your priority, this is going to be a lot of noise coming in. And so to adjust these settings, you go into the edit settings. And if you're familiar with change tracking and inventory, you probably noticed that these came up recently. So we've added these file content, Windows servers, services, and new things to the standard Windows file settings. So here you could see what I mentioned earlier. We have tracking using the environment variables. So you could do system drive, system root, Winder, anything that is understood by your machine. So you could create custom environment variables on your machines and then use them in the settings. And then you can also turn on recursion for your different settings and recurse through the folders. This is great, especially if you have like GUIDs and stuff and layers. You can just put in the wildcard and then just go through the folders that you know need to be tracked. And I just want to point out fast that we are kind of backwards for a stereotypical Microsoft house. We actually already had these capabilities in 2017 for Linux, so if you're worried about the parity support, it was actually already there for Linux. And then file content's really cool because we're actually not storing the file content anywhere ourselves. You supply your own Azure storage account, so we never have a hold of any of the content you're bringing in. We do a really secure write-only SAS URL, so we can only ever put the file in there and not read it. It's actually a read SAS URL is generated when you go and click that file content changes button so that only you can read that data. And so this will respect a lot of your RBAC on your machines and make sure that there's no way that we have access to those files. And finally, Windows services, we try to make it as easy as possible. If you want to change the collection frequency, you could just drag the little slider from 30 minutes to 10 seconds or anywhere in between. So this is really great for just kind of giving you that overall view into your environment. And with some of those faster things, it's really easy to just do and be empowered to do more. So for instance, I could drill down into log analytics. And I know that there is a file that I wanted to look at that I saw was changing a lot. So kind of use some of this help in log analytics. And so here I can see that my host files were changing. So I can show references specifically to this file. And this file is kind of important to me, so I'd like to know when it's changed. So I could click on this new alert rule, and it actually brings me straight into Azure Monitor, where I can create an alert based off that custom log search. And there are so many things, if you're not familiar with Azure Monitor and Azure Alerts, that you can do based off that. There are scripts in the PowerShell gallery that you can upload into your automation account that allow you to restart a service. So if you're trying to alert on a service being down, you could just have it trigger a script that restarts that service. And you're basically just limitless with the possibilities you can take in between the logic apps, functions, and automation runbooks, email, text that you can all trigger from Azure Monitor and Azure Alerts. The last thing I wanted to show you, and kind of what's new, is in inventory. I mentioned we have that log analytics machine integration. So if I go there, I can see these different machine groups. And what's great about this is in core inventory, we show you a breakdown by version and how many machines have that version. But sometimes you're looking across your environment and you don't really care what version, you just want to see the machines that have a specific software or have a certain specific set of configurations, so you need something more customizable than we offer you in our default views. So with that, you can create your own script or own safe search and create a definition for it in a machine group, and it will show you all the machines that have that. And then these can actually be reused in your log analytics queries to just view data according to these machines that have returned. So that's incredibly powerful for that integration opportunity. The other thing I wanted to kind of delve more into is this integration with Azure Security Center. We know security is important to you, and so we wanted to kind of make sure that it was available where you want to be. So we integrated with Azure Security Center so that for files and registry, straight in the Azure Security Center experience. So located in Azure Security Center, but powered by change tracking. And this is required for a lot of your different regulatory and compliance scenarios, so HIPAA, PCI, SOX. And it's really awesome because you're getting that content and knowledge from ASC of what to track. And what's even better is that if you're already paying for ASC Premium, this is included at no additional cost. So just to kind of show you where that's located, if you go and click on Azure Security Center in your services, you can go and drill down, and at the very bottom in Advanced Cloud Defense, you'll see that they recently took away the preview tag. So file integrity monitoring is now generally available in Azure Security Center. And conference Wi-Fi is always a joy. So here you can see the different log analytics workspaces I have. I could see exactly how many machines are in them, how many changes are being reported. I could see whether or not they're hooked up to Azure Security Center. And so if I click on one that's not hooked up now, I could go and drill down and see exactly what settings they're planning to apply to track in my environment. But if I drill down to one that does have kind of the settings all set up and is already hooked in, I can see exactly how many file and registry changes happened and kind of just a different view and experience. And like I said, if you have Azure Security Center Premium, this is already available to you and you're just not using it yet. So quickly, as John talked about earlier, we're both across Windows and Linux. We support Windows Server 2008 R2 and later, and across a whole bunch of different Linux distros. For a lot of these distros, we'll support anything that is currently being supported by the distro, but we have details about all of these versions and everything online. So next thing I kind of wanted to cover quickly was configuration management. So this is setting and controlling your configuration as code. So how do you actually apply that configuration and have something a little more custom, whether it's a role or just how do you set it up and make sure it stays set up like that and that it doesn't drift. So manage the configuration of your operating system and your application settings and being able to view those across your environment at scale. And another cool thing, you're storing all these configurations centrally in your automation account, which gives you a lot of control and just makes it easier to do it at scale. So if you haven't played around with it, I am going to demo it, but I first want to cover some of the new stuff you've seen. Because if you have played with DSC in the past, you'll notice that it's changed a lot in the past few months. One of our big ones is that we completely revamped the UX to make it easier to use. So it makes it a lot easier to find what you're looking for and to more easily find things that are connected. It was a little unclear before about the relationships between things, so we wanted to kind of bubble that up and make it much easier to find your machines that had a specific configuration or the compiled configurations or MOFs associated with a specific configuration. We also wanted to make sure that you are able to empower your app owners. So to do that, we brought this experience onto the VM. So much like what John showed earlier, you may have noticed that configuration management is now in that operations section of your table of contents or resource menu on your VM. And then we're really trying to bring down that learning curve. So you'll find that now in the PowerShell gallery, you can actually download configurations. And we're also working on a new experience that you can use it now to actually develop configurations from composite blocks. So being able to work across teams where you each develop a certain portion of the configuration and then being able to compile them together. And so kind of starting off here on the VM, like I mentioned, you have this configuration management preview. And from there, you'll be able to see the configuration that's applied to this machine, whether or not it's compliant with it, exactly what resources are being used, and what module and version of the module they're looking at. You could also look at the history of previous reports. And if you're just getting started, there's a cool quick start guide that explains how you can set the state for this machine. But I'm going to go into the automation account and kind of look at that at scale view. So this view is really cool because you can drill down into just click on the failed VM and I could see exactly which machine was failed. I could drill down further into it. And so actually see the details like the IP address, last time it was reported. And I could see that it's been failed for some time, so this should have been something I checked in on earlier. And I can see exactly which resource of my configuration failed. So I could drill down further into that and see that it failed pretty quickly, so let me figure out if there was an error report. And I could see the error message and the error code straight from this experience. We could also delve into different configurations and compiled configurations. What's nice about the compiled configurations, you can see how many machines have that configuration applied, and then you can easily click this little ellipses and find the machines that have that configuration assigned to them. And so that gives you a lot of power to figure out how all of these different things are connected. And like I mentioned earlier, you can delve into the gallery that we have attached in order to download pre-made configurations to help you get started. And we also have this new compose configuration experience where you can go, give it a specific name, and set the policy. So let's see. I have my org requires a certain password policy, so I'll make sure that one's included. But then I can also do rename and join, change the PS execution policy. And once I've selected the ones I want, all I have to do is click next. And this is actually generating the source code so that I can see the configuration that will be applied to my environment and that I can double check it before it is applied. So looks good. And then in this experience, I can easily set all of the parameters that I need to set, and then save and compile. So all these capabilities offer a really cool experience to kind of give you an insight into what state your environment is in, and then take control over it. And there are some really cool key scenarios for this, including compliance. So have your machines drifted from the required configuration, and are there certain machines that have a specific software that I should be concerned about? And alerting. So is one of your machines out of compliance? Do I want to receive an alert about that? Was this key configuration file that's really important to keeping the server up, was that modified? Or is one of my system critical services down, and should I be doing something about it? And then troubleshooting. So I know the system went down, but I didn't account for that in my configuration. What can I see about my environment and what changed on it before that happened? Or simple things like, was a new software installed that could be problematic? One scenario we had here was actually that a customer came to us and said that this was super useful because they saw this big slowdown on all their machines, and they realized someone had gone through and installed antivirus software that was just eating up all their CPU. And so they were able to easily see that through using change tracking, inventory, and DSC. So congratulations for staying this long and bearing with us. I know it's Friday and you're ready to get to lunch and to go home. So just some quick takeaways before we go. So update management, how do you assess, deploy, and verify the updates across your machines at scale? And how can you do this in centralized compliance and distributed management across your hybrid environment? And then configuration management. How do you apply that in-guest configuration and make sure that things don't change? So what do I have? Has it changed? And how can I ensure that it stays configured correctly? If you want to learn more about this area, there was a bunch of presentations at Ignite, and this deck will be online so you can actually look at those codes. And if you're looking for a little more guidance, I suggest you look into Fast Track. They have a lot of practices, tools, expertise from Microsoft engineers and their partners that can kind of help you get started with a lot of this stuff. So thank you so much for coming today. Please do give us an evaluation, and if you have any questions, feel free to stop by.